Hey everybody, welcome to another YouTube tutorial video here. In today's video, I'm going to be painting a landscape scene again. This time it's going to be more of a sunset scene, and I'll be going through the steps as well as some fundamentals in how I made this painting, so feel free to paint along if you wish to do so. Before we begin, the canvas size here is going to be a 4200 pixel by a 2800 pixel canvas, and the color profile as usual is an sRGB. Now, the brushes I'll be using are going to be from my free brush pack that you can find on Patreon. I'll leave the link in the description, but it's just these eight brushes here. And I'll also use some brushes from Procreate as well. This is done in Procreate on an iPad Pro, but you should be able to paint this on any software, so it shouldn't matter too much. But with that said, let's get into it. So the first thing I'll do here, I'm going to grab an airbrush, and I want to paint the background. So I usually start off with the background sky layer, and in this case I'm going to paint it this warm orange color. So we're just going to go into the warms here, and I'll select a lighter, slightly more saturated orange color, and I'm just going to paint in the whole canvas with this color. And so this airbrush has pressure opacity, meaning that the harder I press, the darker the paint will be, or the more opaque the paint will be rather. And so I can control how intense I want the paint to be, just based off of how hard I press with the stylus. So in this area right here on the left third of the canvas, I want this to be a little bit lighter and slightly more warm, since I'm planning to have a sun in this area. And so what I'll do is just take this hue slider and push it more towards the yellows, and I'm going to make it a little lighter. And so that's kind of how I want this to work. We want it to be more of a yellow color because, again, the sun is going to be here, so it's going to just influence the whole atmosphere in the sky to feel a little warmer, a little lighter than the surrounding orange colors. And so I'll just try to make sure I have a nice smooth gradient here, and that it feels gradual. I don't want anything to feel too harsh right now. And in this upper right corner up here, I'll take the hue slider again and move it into the reds. So we're going from the yellows, now we're going through the oranges into the reds. And basically what this is doing is creating some light fall off, or just a transition from more of this yellow portion where the sun is going to be, into these oranges and then into these reds. So if we look on this slider here, we're basically going from here, these yellows, into the oranges and then into the reds. And if we were to keep going outside of this canvas, if this canvas were to be extended, we could actually continue this transition into these cooler reds, into the pinks, into the purples, and then eventually into the blues if we were able to see far enough out here. All right, so now I have a sky painted down on layer 1. So before we get into anything else, I'm just going to tap on the wrench icon and then tap on the drawing guide to get in a drawing perspective grid. I'm going to tap on edit drawing guide, tap on perspective, and then just tap on the screen. And now we have a horizon line on the screen. And this is just going to help me with perspective and with the eye level and everything like that. So I'm going to take this horizon line and bring it up to about just under halfway of the canvas. So I'd say about here is fine. And I'm going to take this vanishing point, which is this blue circle here, and just pull it out of the canvas here to the left to somewhere about here. So it's going to be off screen. Along this blue line, I can tap again just to get in a second point. And now we have a 2-point perspective grid here. And with this 2-point grid, I think this should be good enough to paint this scene. We shouldn't need a third point or anything like that. So we can continue on here. Let me turn down the opacity so I can see what's beneath that grid. All right, so I'm gonna make a new layer here, layer 2, and I'm gonna just start painting some of the foreground here, or this grass layer, this terrain layer. So to do that, I'm gonna select this whole painting is gonna be warmer colors. So this one's going to be a little darker than the sky, so we'll say maybe something like this, maybe a little darker than that. So this orange red, kind of mid-tone, maybe a little darker, somewhat neutral color. And we're just going to paint this in. And I'll come up to about maybe this point here. So about, I'd say maybe a little bit over 1/3 of the canvas here. It doesn't have to be exact, but just start to get in this rectangle-like shape and get maybe some of the edges of this rectangle, kind of have some grass blades using this brush here. All right, so the next thing I'll do is make a new layer. I'll go to the sky layer, make a new layer above that. So now we're below this terrain layer. And I'm gonna start painting in some trees now. And this time I'm gonna select more of a neutral, warm color here. And I'll just start painting in some shapes for these trees and just getting in the general silhouette. So something like this on the right side, and maybe on this side over here, we can have maybe some trees up here, and they maybe come down like this. And I'll adjust some of these shapes, so I'll just make a selection and resize it if needed, just to make room for that sunset. And I want to leave this area right here, kind of like this dip right here, and then behind it I'm going to have some trees back there in the background in a minute, but I'll get to that. So I'm really just working on silhouettes right now, and like usual, that's how I'm starting these paintings. And it's just to keep me from getting too focused on any detail or any color or any form or anything like that, because painting landscapes and environments can be tricky and it can be overwhelming sometimes, but that's just one thing that I try to do to make things a little more simple for me, is just focusing on the shape, the big shape at first, because the shape is really what matters for the composition and all of that. Having these shapes looking nice is what matters. It doesn't really matter how detailed we go, you know. It doesn't matter how much color variety or anything like that we get. All of that is nice, and it plays a part into the final painting, but it's not as important when it comes to building a composition and just building a structured piece. And it's almost like pieces of a puzzle, and trying to fit those together and fit a nice composition of those pieces, and then later on we can add color and detail those pieces. All right, I'm actually gonna move this down a little bit, or a little bit to the left rather, and just to frame this a little bit better and continue filling in these trees on this side. So for now, these trees should be good. So I'll go to layer 1 and make a new layer above layer 1. And I'm gonna get, like I said, I wanted some trees back here a little bit lighter. So I'll do that. I'll just take sample this color that I was using for these trees, and I'm just gonna make it a little lighter. And I want it to be a little warmer as well. So I'm just gonna take this slider and push it more into the oranges. And so something like maybe a little bit more saturated than that, but something like this. The reason I want it to be more of an orange color is because the further back we get, the more atmosphere is going to be between these trees here and these big trees up here. So there's going to be more atmosphere within this area here. And that atmosphere in this scene is a warmer color. Since this is a sunset scene, everything's going to feel more yellow, orange, and red. So what I'll do now is go to layer 2, create a new layer above it, and continue to get in some of these shapes. I'm going to switch brushes here. I'll go to the painting section on Procreate default brushes, and there's this brush called the Salamanca brush, which basically just looks like this. It's like just a painterly brush. I'm sure other softwares have similar brushes, but I'm on layer 5 here, and I'm going to just sample this tree color and just pull it darker. Get it a little bit darker, because the closer that we get to the viewer, so the closer we get to the bottom of the canvas here, the darker things are usually going to be. And so what I'll do is just start to paint in some more trees here with a darker value and build in some more depth into this scene. I'll use this brush a little bit here, but I'll probably switch brushes in a moment, just because I don't want this one texture to be the same texture throughout. So I'll switch to this rectangle paintbrush that I have here in my brush pack and just paint some more foliage, just add on to the foliage here. And so this way we're getting some of that painterly texture that I painted earlier, and I'm also getting these hard edge textures that I'm getting in now with this rectangle paintbrush. So just trying to get some variety with the textures there. I try not to have anything feel too similar. I like to have some variety with the paint strokes. I don't want to do too much though, because I think that will start to get confusing for me if I start to add too many different textures. So the base of these bushes isn't actually completely horizontal, since we have a perspective grid on this scene, right? So since this scene has perspective in it, these bottom of these bushes will actually follow the grid going this way. So it'll look something like that, rather than being completely horizontal like this. So what's happening is basically these bushes are receding back into the scene, and they're actually going back to this vanishing point that's on the left side that we put over here earlier on. And so the same thing would happen on this side. So these bushes going this way wouldn't be horizontal like this. They'd actually be more like this. And they would recede back to this point that we put somewhere over here. And so that's basically how this perspective is going to work. The further that we get to the horizon line, the more things will look horizontal. So like these trees that we painted here, they can look pretty horizontal like this, and that should be fine just because they're further back. But as you can see on this grid, if you can imagine something even closer, it would have even more of a drastic shift or a drastic direction change, right, to the vanishing points that we put in. So with that said, I'll just continue to build up these bushes here, these trees, whatever these are. I'm not worried too much about texture or about details, but I will start to carve into some of these shapes using the erase tool, just to clean up and indicate that these are bushes and trees a little bit better. But again, we're not doing too much with detail. The scene is very atmosphere heavy, so I probably won't be able to see a lot of individual colors and individual details, just because it's all kind of merging together. So that's one thing to keep in mind when there's a lot of atmosphere in the scene. Atmosphere often groups detail to where you won't really be able to see individual color shifts as much. So that's something I'm keeping in mind here. All right, so one thing I can do now is start to get in some grass on this terrain layer. So this layer 2 that we have, I'll just start to paint in some form on this rectangle shape that we made. So just get a slightly more saturated color, this slightly lighter, more saturated orange, and start to paint in with this. And I can bring it up to the top of this rectangle here. So I'll just go right up until the edge of this rectangle that we painted. And I don't want the shape to be flat like this. I do want to get some grass texture, so I'm having this irregular shape to the edge of this rectangle here, of this terrain layer. And it's basically just trying to indicate that it's an uneven terrain. Maybe there's some grass parts that are taller, and there's some parts that are lower. So in this section up here in the foreground, I want this to be a little lighter just right here. And then I want to save this very bottom part. We're going to get in some darker colors there, but for now, I think we can build up this part right here with this lighter, more saturated color, because we're going to have the sun right here again in this area up here, and it's going to bring down some sunlight into this scene, and which is going to hit along these areas here. And so yeah, I'm kind of just setting the stage for that right now. And I'll make a new layer above layer 2, and in fact, I'll put it above everything, and I'll sample this color that I used for these bushes, and I'll just start to paint in some grass parts down here that are going to be darker than the rest of the grass. So kind of like a silhouette of some grass right here. And you can use a grass brush if you want. I have this grass brush included in my brush pack here. You can stamp in some of those brush shapes and continue to build up some of this texture down here. And so I just want this to feel natural. I want it to feel irregular and almost random, because this is an organic grass shape, so we don't want it to feel too repetitive. So just if you're painting along, just try to change up the size, try to have some variety to it, because that's going to help. It's going to help your painting feel more natural, especially since we're doing an environment scene. This isn't like a human-made object or a human-made scene. So we want some irregularity and some randomness to the grass. And we can always come back to it later. I don't need to completely finish it right now, but as long as I just have something in there that I think works well, then we should be good. All right, so the scene is starting to feel a little bit more structured, and like it has some more depth to it, and that's a good thing. So what I'll do now is just keep on building up some of this grass texture here, just to start to get in some form and some texture onto these shapes that we've made. I like the composition, and I think that it reads pretty well. And so, yeah, now it's just about kind of detailing and texturing a lot of what we have here and making sure that we get some atmosphere. I'm definitely going to want to add some fog in here later on, but that'll come later once we get some texture in here. It's like one of those finishing touches type things, so we'll get to that in a moment. But for now, just building up some of this area here. And something that I'm just keeping in mind is not to get too contrasty with the colors here. So for example, on this grass, I don't want to add a value in this area that would be too much of a contrast. So I wouldn't want to add like a dark color like this. That creates too much contrast. I also wouldn't want to add a really light color like this, because that's too much contrast, right, between this light color here and the surrounding darker colors. So the color shifts that I'm having here are very, very subtle. So you can see this color here compared to the surrounding colors around it isn't that big of a change. And therefore, if we zoom out, our eyes don't get called to that area, right? We don't get distracted by that. So areas of contrast are where your eye is going to look. So for example, if we have, like we're going to in a moment, if we have a sun in the sky right here, that's a point of contrast, because this color white is so bright compared to even these brighter sky colors around it. It's just so much contrast here. And so yeah, that's basically one thing that I'm trying to keep in mind, is just to reduce the amount of contrast, especially because, again, there is so much atmosphere in this scene, and the atmosphere really groups things together. And atmosphere does a good job of taking out detail, taking out contrast, and grouping everything together. So by atmosphere, I just mean fog and lighting and just particles in the air, all of that type of stuff. Everything that's going to make this scene feel like it has a heavy atmosphere, heavy fog, heavy kind of a dense feeling to it. That's the atmosphere. So we'll get to that in a moment, like I said. But for now, again, just building up these colors and building up these textures. On the ground, I want this area of shadow right here, and as well as right here, because again, the sun is going to be in this area, so the sunlight's going to be coming down into the scene like this, and so we need shadows to represent that. And so I don't want the shadows to be too harsh, because again, the atmosphere is going to make the shadows much softer. So the edges don't need to be too harsh, but I just do want some areas of darkness underneath these bushes here. All right, one thing I can do is erase some of the bottom of this bush down here, just to have it feel like the grass is coming up into the bush, like it's overlapping the bottom of the bush. And so it just doesn't feel like it's just a straight line as we had previously, but just a little bit of overlap should be good. All right, so at this point, I'll move on to these trees right here on layer 3. And I'll start to take out some shapes. So I'll just use the erase tool and cut out some shapes here, just to have some pockets where maybe the leaves aren't as dense and where we can see the sky a bit more. I can definitely overdo this, so I'm not trying to do too much of this, but I do want some of this just to be able to see more through the sky. But again, this is something that can be overdone if not done carefully. So I'm just doing a few of those, zooming out, flipping the canvas, seeing how everything looks, and moving on from there. And if I need more, then I'll do a few more and then repeat that process. And just have these trees feel less just like blocky shapes and more like actual tree silhouettes. What I could also do is add onto this shape and get in some silhouette of some of these branches. So just draw in some branches along the edges. Again, one of those things I don't want to do too much of, but just a few of these from here and there could be good to indicate that some branches are coming off of the trees here. All right, so with that looking better, what I can do now is start to get in some of this fog and this atmosphere on the scene. So to do this, I'm just going to use an airbrush that I have here. Doesn't matter what type, you just need a soft brush, and make a new layer above the trees just so that we have the freedom to delete this if it doesn't work out. And I'll start with a cooler blue color here, so something like this, a very neutral, a lighter blue. Doesn't really matter the exact color, but we just want a neutral, lighter, cooler color. And I'll start to paint in some atmosphere just along the base of these mid-ground trees there. So something like this, and we just going horizontally and just painting in along this area right here. And this is going to introduce more color into the scene, so more of a color variety rather than having the whole scene feel monochromatic. This actually is going to introduce a cooler color, which is, I think, going to help out quite a bit in terms of the color palette here. And we can always change the value and the intensity of this fog as well. But as of now, I'm just getting in kind of a shape, and then we can always reduce some of it or erase some out later if we need to. All right, now we have some blue fog in this scene, and I'll erase some of it out here by using an airbrush and just erase some of the top parts just to reduce some of it. I feel like it may have just been a little bit too much, but I think this is good. So this creates a separation between this, between these trees here these darker trees, and between these trees back here in this midground. So it creates more of a depth between those two layers, which is good because we don't want this scene to feel flat. We want to try to introduce more depth into it, and like I said, this atmosphere is really going to help do that. And so that's one of the benefits of that. So now we're able to start to see the individual shapes a little bit more clearly. And so I can further go off of that by getting in some more atmosphere here. I'll go on a new layer just because I'm going to have some warmer atmosphere now, so I don't want it to affect this cooler atmosphere that we were just doing. So again, I'll get an airbrush, the same kind of thing here. And I'll actually put this layer above the layer 2, above the grass layer. Before we do that, I should probably get the sun in here. So let's just do that real quick. I'll just make a new layer above the sky layer, and I'm gonna grab a round opaque brush, or just a round brush in general should be fine. And I'll get a very, very light, close to white, but not quite white, but pretty close to it. Orange, yellow, orange, warm color here. So something like this, and just in this area about here, like I said, this upper left third area of the canvas, I'm just going to tap in with this brush to get in a circle. And I can make the circle a little bit smaller if needed, but I think this should do. So just push it over a little bit more, just adjust the placement of it. And I'll flip the canvas just to see how everything looks. And I think it looks pretty good in that spot, maybe just a little bit smaller. And so now that we have the sun in, I'm feeling like these trees on this, just this section of these trees, these trees here, could be bigger. So I just made a selection on this left side of these trees right here. And I'll just make these a little bigger and just increase the size just to help out with the composition and the framing a little bit more. So before, these just felt a little too small, and now they feel a little bit more like how I want them to. So, all right, I'll actually take this sun and move it more like this. So I'm having it more in between this shape. So if we think of this like a triangle here, it'd be like in a kind of in the center of this triangular shape. So something like this, and yeah, I think that's good. So we can always adjust these things since we keep them on separate layers. It's not an issue to adjust them later if we need to. So back to what we were doing earlier with the atmosphere, I'll go to this layer 9, which is this layer we were going to work on. I'll take layer 9 and I'll actually bring it below layer 7 and above layer 3. And I'll tap on layer 9 and set it to clipping mask, which is just going to make sure that all of our paint strokes will be within this tree silhouette shape. So what I can do now is sample a warmer sky color, and I'm just going to softly paint in along this silhouette, just along the edges here to get in some color. And I'm doing it pretty softly using an airbrush just so that I don't want anything to be too hard edged. I just want to have soft edges here. But this will help get some atmosphere onto these trees and have more of a gradient. And as they get further down towards this cooler blue fog, they're going to start to get darker in this area here. So it just creates a transition downwards. But again, we're not doing too much with this, just enough to have it feel like the lighting is affecting this shape. And the further away from the sun, so like these back here, probably can have less of that. In fact, what I can do is sample this purple, red, brown color that we used earlier, make it a little darker, and paint in some of this over here just to have it even darker on the edges here. Because again, the further away from the sun, the less influence from the sun that this area is going to feel. All right, so now that we have this is before and now this is after, and it just feels like there's some more gradient on there, and it feels just like it fits in the scene better. These trees do. So that's a good thing. What I can do now is make a new layer above that, and we'll keep it below layer 7. So layer 11 right here above layer 9. I'm going to sample the sky color here. And this time I'm going to be more towards the oranges, so kind of up here in this corner. So on the color palette, it's about here. Again, I don't give color palettes, or I don't give the exact colors or anything, because it's good to be able to just kind of eyeball it yourself and to be able to eventually get more familiar with colors yourself. So it doesn't have to be exact. See what works and see what doesn't. And if it doesn't work, try to figure out why it doesn't work. Is it too dark of a color? Is it too light? Is it too saturated, too desaturated? These are questions that you can ask that will really help you grow, rather than me just providing some preset color palette. So that's why I do it that way. But back to the painting here, I'll just start to get in some atmosphere back here. Just some of that orange color back here and in front of these trees here. And maybe I'll get more of a warmer. So we were using we sampled like this color up here. We'll just maybe get more of an orange, a little bit lighter, and start to paint in some of that. So the closer to the sun, same thing how we did with the sky. Closer to the sun is warmer. Further away is a little bit cooler. So these oranges and reds are a little cooler than this hot sun area right here. So that's kind of the general vibe that I'm going for. And so that same idea for the sky is in effect here for this atmosphere. I'm using the smudge tool now and just smudging some of this atmosphere out and smudging it into more of a natural shape, just to have it feel more like it's fog rather than it's like just an airbrush. The airbrush tool is great, but when overdone, it can feel, has a certain feel to it that I don't really like. So I'll actually erase some of this atmosphere on the side out right here, just because we're getting further away from the sun and the lighting isn't going to hit it as much. And get rid of some of that. Again, we're still on this layer 11, which is just this warmer atmosphere here. And we'll get some back here as well. All right, so what I can do now is maybe move this sun down just a little bit more. Something like that. And I'll go back to the sky layer. And now that I know where the sun is exactly, I can start to fix up some of the sky that we painted. So I'm going to sample this orange color over here and just implement some of that on the left side of the sky right here, just to have this lighter yellow orange be more compact around the sun and less spread out. And we introduce some more saturated yellows down here around the sun as well. And yeah, just building up this. I'll probably switch brushes here. I'll switch to this flat paintbrush here just to get in some texture for the sky, but that's just a personal preference thing. I like to have some type of painterly texture in the sky, but if you're cool with the airbrush, then by all means, stick with whatever you think looks good. I'll get in some pinks down here just to introduce some more color variety into the sky. And I think just having a subtle pink right there should be good. Maybe right here as well. Not too noticeable, but enough to have some more color into this otherwise pretty monochromatic scene. All right, with that in, we can start to get in some clouds here. So I'll make a new layer above layer 1, and I will use a round brush, just a regular round brush, and I'll sample the sun color and just make it a little more saturated and a little darker. So just about here. And I'll start to paint in some clouds here. So these clouds are very light because they're getting a lot of that direct sunlight. And keeping the brush pretty small. These are smaller fine line clouds, but the closer to the sun they are, the lighter they should be. So just make it slightly lighter, get some more clouds in. And so what I can actually do here is just shift this more into the oranges, get a darker, more saturated color, so something about here, and paint in some clouds on this side as well, except these are going to be darker because the sun isn't actually going to be able to hit these as much. Something like this. You may have to play around with the color a little bit, but just make sure that the value doesn't have too much contrast, because like we talked about earlier with the contrast, we don't want to have too much of that in areas that don't need it. So yeah, I'll work on these clouds. I'll get some lighter clouds in here, some of these darker clouds in here, and I'll be back in a moment once I have that looking how I want it to. All right, so for now, these clouds are okay. Just want to continue to work on this grass here in the foreground. I'm kind of jumping around the canvas here, but I'm doing that to just keep my mind fresh and not get too stuck on one particular area, because if we start to look at one particular area too much, then we may start to lose sight of everything else. So I'm just trying to keep everything in focus, right? Keep everything in mind right here. So just build up some of this texture for this grass more, some of the form and the lighting. Again, just don't want to have too much contrast, but just enough to indicate that there is some form and that there is some detail here. And I actually probably make this whole layer here just a little darker, because what we can do now, I just made it about 1% darker. Now I'll go in above that layer on layer 13, and I'll get an airbrush and I'll sample the sky color again, and just this orange up here. So if we look at the palette here, it's just this very light orange, and just maybe more saturated than that though, just a little bit more. And I'll just get in some atmosphere along this grass right here. So we'll just kind of go horizontally like this and get in this horizontal streak. And I'll take an eraser, set it to the airbrush, and I'll just erase out some of the sides right here, just so it has more of a, I guess, more of a taper on the edges. right, so something like that should be good. And then what I can do is actually make a new layer above layer 13, set it to clipping mask. And what I'll do is get a more saturated red color and paint the edges. So it's very similar to how we handled the sky, how the edges are red or more of an orange. I'll just do the same thing here. So we're just following that kind of light fall off where the direct light is going to be more of this warmer orange yellow, and then it starts to transition into these deeper oranges and reds on the edges. So something like that should be good. What I can do here is then collapse those two layers, and I'll actually go up here to the adjustments, and I'll go to the motion blur, and I'll just drag down on the canvas slightly just to get a little bit of a blur in there as well. And now it's not, it just has more of a blurriness to that atmosphere. And I can smudge some of it out, move it around, just have more irregular edges. But for the most part, I think this works. And then what I can do is make a new layer below that. So I'll go to layer 2, make a new layer above layer 2, so layer 14. And I'll do the same thing, except I will sample this blue color that we used for the fog, and I'll just paint in a horizontal streak here. We can have it kind of come in front of these bushes here, or below these bushes here rather, and just cut across the scene like this. And I'll also do that along here where the edge of the terrain level, the edge of this grass layer is, just at the very top there. And creating these bands or these streaks of atmosphere going across horizontally, and then having like this pocket right here be without as much atmosphere, so we can see more of the ground. Same thing up here in the front, and just kind of following that pattern there. And I'll do the same thing, erase some of it if needed. You can add a motion blur like how I did for the other one. I don't know how much that's really going to do, since this soft airbrush is already pretty soft edged, so I may not do that for these. I'll create a new layer above layer 14, set it to clipping mask, and I'll actually sample the sun color, so this very light white, and I'll just paint just in the middle right here where this sunlight would be coming down, very similar to how we handled the last atmosphere, and just have it have a soft transition into the cooler blues. Don't want it to be too strong, but something like that should be okay. And then I'll actually collapse this layer, and I think I'll erase some of this out here, just in this area here, just to fix up that shape a little bit more. But as you can see, I'm just working with this fog, trying to figure out something that works and something that looks good and that fits this scene. All right, so with this atmosphere in now, I just wanted to see how that looks with the atmosphere in, and it looks okay. It's not exactly how I want it, but it will do for now. And so what I can do now is I'll just sample this brown color here, just get in some more details. So basically what I'm doing here is just getting in more details underneath this atmosphere. We're on layer 2 here, so this terrain layer, and getting in some more grass, because now I see how this atmosphere is going to kind of be on this field, and I want to deal with the details now. So now I can know where to add these details, because before I didn't really have an idea of where to put these or in what areas would be being blocked by the atmosphere. But now I know where everything is, so I can get this in now. What I can do as well is I'll create a new layer and go to the inking section, which is right here, and use the thylacine brush. And we'll just add some more of these details in here. In fact, I'll probably turn off the atmosphere layers, these 2 fog layers that we added on the ground there, just so I can see more of what's beneath it, and so I can sample these colors more properly and not have that atmosphere affect it. And what I'll do is just start to paint some more grass. And this rake brush, or this thylacine brush, is good for getting in these grass strokes here, getting some kind of like a stylized grass stroke. And I will do that as all throughout this grass, add some more detail. I'll probably speed this part of the video up because it's not much to talk about here except just adding in detail. So I'll be back in a moment whenever I finish that up. All right, so with this grass looking better, it's got some more textures in here. I'll definitely add on more to it at the end. But for now, I think it's good enough to move on to the next step here, which is going to be to get some more atmosphere and depth in this scene. So I'll go to this tree layer here, layer 3, and I've collapsed that layer of gradient or transition that we added earlier. And what I'll do is make a selection of this kind of another tree shape here, but my goal here is to separate these trees over here from these right here. So I just want to have some more atmosphere in this area in between them. So I'm just making a selection, and then I'll just create that selection there and use an airbrush, and I'm just going to sample this orange color here and just very softly get in some atmosphere between these trees. And my hope here is that this will separate these two trees to make it feel like there's two layers of trees there. We can do this on a separate layer if we want, just so that we don't mess anything up. And so I just have a separate layer 18 above layer 3, and I'm just softly painting in between these two trees. And I feel like see, now it feels like these are closer to us, and it's not bad. I think I may take some of that out, so I may just erase some of that. You could also just lower the opacity of the layer right here. So just lower this opacity. And I think I'll do that. So something like this. And I think I'll also erase more of the base out as well. So we just get just a little bit of that atmosphere there. I think should work fine. It just adds a very subtle detail that probably isn't really that necessary, but just something I thought I'd try out. From here, I'll go to these trees. I'll go to these trees in the background, and I'll increase the brightness. Now that we've gotten in other stuff, I feel like these need to be brighter, more saturated as well. Get some more color in there, and maybe adjust the shape a little bit here. Just clean up some of the edges. And yeah, I think those read as trees in the background. What I'll do is make a new layer above that, set it to airbrush, and just sample this yellow, just a yellow color around the sun. It doesn't matter too much. As long as the value is a little lighter than the trees, then it should be fine. And I'll just paint down here at the bottom of the bottom below these trees. And this further increases the depth and the amount of atmosphere that we're getting in here. If you do too much, again, you can just turn down the opacity, and I'll turn it down just a little bit. All right, so just a few more things that I'll do. Go to the sky layer, clean up some of this, maybe make this edge a little darker, a little more saturated up here. And let's see what else we can do. I definitely want to add some more detail to this tree, or just cut it out more to make it feel like it looks more like a tree, but I'll do that later. We don't need to do it right now. One thing we can do is go create a new layer above everything here. So layer 19, we'll just put it above every other layer, and I'll get an airbrush, and I'll make this layer an overlay layer so that we're going to start to get in some lighting now. So I will then get an orange color, so just a very light saturated orange color, and I'll start to paint in maybe a little more yellow than that, but I'll start to paint in some lighting now. And we want it coming from the sun down into the scene, along these edges of these trees here, along the ground as well, this grass. And we can adjust the color from time to time. So I'm just making this less saturated so that the lighter parts are going to feel more like a white or like a yellow sunlight, and then the surrounding areas are going to feel a little more saturated in orange. The parts closer to the direct sunlight are going to be much more yellow and much more warm and bright. And as we get further out from that, it's going to get more of an orange and eventually more into the reds. So just like how we talked about earlier, again, using that same idea for this. And this is really where the scene starts to come to life in terms of lighting. Things start to feel much more vibrant and much more rich in color. And just be careful with these layers. I say this often whenever I use these, but they can start to feel like like a filter if you do too much. Like this looks like a filter, so we don't want to do too much of that. But it is something that is really nice if used sparingly. And you can use a smudge tool in case you want to smudge it around or just move some of the paint that you put down. You can use the erase tool if you feel like you've done too much. And that's what I'll do here, just erase some of this out, maybe put some more in down here, and just play around with this until we find something that works. And so what I can also do is on the same overlay layer, I'll just shift this into the blues and make it a little darker. And I could just start to paint some of that in along the edges here, just along the left and the right side. Don't want to do too much of this at all. I'm really barely even pressing on the canvas with the stylus, but just enough to get some more of that cooler color along the edges. But again, I'll erase some of it out here because I don't want much of that at all. But just enough to get some more cooler color in the scene. I think that will help. And what I'm doing here is just smudging the fog on layer 7 and just smudging it to have it feel more like actual fog, just to have it look a little more realistic. But this is one of those things that I won't do until the end and see how everything else looks. So yeah, with that, let's see what else we can do. The sun could have some bloom to it, so I'll actually go to the sun layer and increase the saturation of the sun slightly so it has more color into it. And then what we can do is go back up to the adjustments and then use the bloom tool and then increase the amount of bloom just by swiping on the screen to the right, and just to increase the bloom. And we can change these settings here and figure out what works well. You may have to play around with it if you're following along. Just play around with it and see what works for you. But I think I'll go with this setting, something like this. And if you tap on the screen and then tap on preview, you can see what it looked like before and now what it looks like after. So it just gives more of a glow to the sun there. And I think that looks better. So I'll go with that. And so from here, it's pretty much just about continuing to do everything that I've just talked about. I'll add some more detail to these trees right here just to make them feel more like they're trees. I don't really like how this one looks in particular, but we'll fix that. I'll continue to add some more overlay and atmosphere around the sun area in this area right here. I'll definitely build up some more of these textures at the bottom and at the foreground and at the bottom of this grass layer here. And so things like that, I'll get some more clouds in on the sky as well, probably maybe get some more texture onto the sky. But again, these are all minor details, smaller things that I wouldn't do until the end. So maybe I'll adjust the value of a few things, but again, for the most part, this is about good for this tutorial. So I'll attach the rest of my progress at the end of the video just so you can see what I did. But again, it's just minor things, just getting it to a finished state. So yeah, I appreciate y'all watching. Hopefully this tutorial was helpful, and I will see y'all in the next video. So stay creative.